right, we're going to move on to our next plenary speaker. And I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Ian Foster, who is the director of Argonne's Data Science and Learning Division, Argonne Senior Scientist and Distinguished Fellow, and the Arthur Holly Compton Distinguished Service Professor of Computer Science at the University of Chicago. Ian's research contributions span high-performance computing, distributed systems, and data-driven discovery. He has published hundreds of scientific papers and 8 books on these and other topics. Methods and software developed under his leadership underpin many large national and international cyber infrastructures. Ian has been honored with several highly regarded awards, and just 1 month ago, we all learned that Ian was named as the 2022 recipient of the ACM and IEEE CS Ken Kennedy Award. Please welcome Dr. Ian Foster.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you can hear me. That's good. So it's such a pleasure and honor to be here. I've been an ESnet fan since, well, the very early days. I don't think I was using it when it was ESnet 0, but certainly ESnet 1 or 2. And it's also wonderful to see so many dear friends and colleagues. Bill Johnston, who I learned so much from, Inder Monga, of course, who's built this along with some help, I believe, but and many others. So thanks so much for having me here. So as we've already heard, if I can make this work, I bet I can. As we've already heard, is this turned on? Yeah, no, it's off. Okay, good. As we've already heard, DOE comprises a whole network of labs, 17 labs. I think I've just heard 28 facilities. We'll get there eventually. Oh, there it is. Tens of thousands of users, thousands of scientists in the labs. Surely the largest resource in the world focused on research, particularly in the physical sciences. And for all these people to work together effectively, they need to be connected, sort of like we need a nervous system to connect our hands and our brain and our senses and so forth. And that's, of course, the role that ESnet plays. And what I sort of want to spend a minute sort of motivating why this is so important. And I thought I'd go back a little bit to the earliest example of team science that I'm aware of. And this is Mr. Eratosthenes back in 245 BC, who had the bright idea of measuring the diameter of the Earth. And turned out he was able to do so with an accuracy of within a few percent, simply by measuring the angle of the sun in 2 locations. At Cyrene, now Aswan, and Alexandria, and the distance between those 2 locations. Measuring the distance is actually quite hard. It turned out back then there were people who were specialized at walking at a constant pace, and they would count the number of paces they used to walk from one place to another. How's that for a profession, I guess? But anyway, so team science, he was able to get a very accurate measurement by combining data from 2 locations plus the distance. It probably took a few months to do that. Didn't matter because the measurement was only being made once and then could be used for a very long time. A more recent example, Robert Fitzroy, some of you have probably heard of him. He was actually the captain on the ship that took Darwin around the world, but he also got involved in weather forecasts. He was using data being transmitted from weather stations across the United Kingdom, using the then new telegraph, so probably getting the data to him in a matter of at least hours, maybe minutes in some cases, and producing weather forecasts which certainly saved lives. They were controversial also at the time, but also gaining new knowledge about the planet. So he was the first person to realize by looking at the data he was collecting that there were these global, very large scale circulatory patterns that we now recognize as cyclones and other things. So 2 examples showing, the first one, data from far away, but collected very slowly. Here, data from far away, but being collected perhaps within minutes or hours. Scientists have always wanted more data, faster data, and also more reliable data. And here's another example of to illustrate why those three different things are important. So here's the Pony Express, which it went from St. Joseph to not far from here, Sacramento. It took about 10 days or roughly 1 million seconds to get a message. You could maybe transport a few hundred letters in that time, so you could move a few tens of kilobytes of data. The actual transfer rate is maybe, you might get it up to a byte per second if you took enough letters in one go. The reliability, which we just heard about, probably not so good. There were hostile natives and floods and I don't know what else. So not the ideal transport system. So of course, what ESnet has been doing since at least 1986, perhaps earlier, has been trying to improve on the Pony Express in various dimensions. So today we're at the point where the latency from St. Joseph's to Sacramento is probably a pretty consistent, roughly 12 milliseconds. So it's about 10 million times better. And thanks to many decades of work, this is a very reliable 12 milliseconds. It doesn't change from day to day or moment to moment, which is vital for so much of science if you want to get a measurement exactly at the time that you want it. Its capacity has gone up similarly to here we've got a terabyte link. Perhaps to get from Sacramento to St. Joseph, it might be around more a few hundred gigabytes per second. But again, hundreds of millions times superior to that of the Pony Express. And the reliability, as we just heard from a previous, from Vint, is extremely high. All of these links are very carefully engineered, and there are many redundant links, so that it's very unlikely that data will not be able to get through. So these are all things that make what we can do with this system for science much superior. Oh, and one more measurement that's sort of interesting is, oops, sorry, too many buttons, is another measure which network engineers will appreciate. I've always liked it because it's very important in supercomputing, is not just the link, the capacity of a single link, but what's called the bisection bandwidth, the amount of data you can transfer from one side of a network to the other side. And this has gone up by an amazing 100 million times in just 30 years. So a very richly connected network has been constructed. So what can we do with this network? I'm going to talk about something called smart instruments in a minute, but I'll just mention that something we just did very recently was replicate the entire contents of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, CMIP archive from Livermore Lab to Argonne and Oak Ridge. And we just did it by starting a transfer and leaving it to run. It took 3 months. As things improve in terms of local connections, we'll probably be able to do it in days, but the fact that it was completely automated and moved this data without any human interaction was quite remarkable. But what I wanted to talk about for the rest of my time here is just is this question of what can we do that's different. Now we have this ultra fast, ultra stable, and ultra reliable network available to us. Of course, we can move more data. We can move data faster. We can talk reliably on video conferences most of the time. I guess Vince sort of broke up a bit at the end there, which is, I'm sure it wasn't running over ESnet, that part. It was probably the Google part of the connection. I did that. What can we do? Well, now we know that the network can be totally relied on. We can start looking at using it to do new things. And I've coined this term smart instruments. You could use a different term. Basically, what I mean is the ability to put together things that might say, take a sensor. This is the Linux synchrotron light source at SLAC, connect it to a computer. This is the Polaris computer at Argonne Lab. Connect it perhaps also to a, this is a AI agent. I don't know, it's located in Florida for some reason, but it of course could be anywhere. And then use that to control the instrument. So this is something that people have been doing for many years, is doing real-time control of instruments, but typically within the context of a single lab. We can start now to put together these smart instruments using components located wherever they happen to be best available. The most powerful computer, the largest database, the smartest AI agent, etc. So why would we want to, I don't know why this keeps, why would we want to do this? Well, let me give you a few examples that, of things that I or my colleagues have been involved in. So here's one in which it actually involves the LCLS at SLAC. We're interested in imaging materials, granular materials, understanding how they deform under stress, trying to understand causes of failure, one of the biggest obstacles to economic development in many cases, the high reason for the high cost of things like airplanes and automobiles. So you want, in order to do that, you want to be able to collect data in real time from these from this beamline, and then immediately, quasi-immediately detect the structure of the material, and then use that information to feed back for the next phase of your experiment. And how do you do that? Well, the way you can't do it using conventional computing, you use so-called AI or machine learning, using models that are trained on large supercomputers. And what the SLAC team has been doing is moving the data to Argonne National Lab to do the training. It takes about 5 seconds to move the data, 19 seconds to train the network, 7 seconds to move the data back. I got the things in the wrong way around there, but a total of 31 seconds, which means you can do these feeding back on the instrument every 31 seconds. We'd like to do even better, and with ESnet6, we surely can slash the transfer time by probably a factor of 10. We can slash the training time by a factor of 10 easily using next generation supercomputers. We can get down to probably just 2 or 3 seconds iteration time. And that will transform how we're able to understand these very important materials. So just to sort of raise up our level of thinking, what we're doing basically here is the user is defining a little flow, we might call it, comprising transfer, model training, deployment, and then we're going to map that flow onto the computers that are available to us in this distributed ESnet6 connected system. Another example, oops, sorry, where are we? Here we go. Another example, totally different field. The new Crocus integrated urban field lab is similarly collecting data, but in this case from urban sensors, satellites, and supercomputer simulations to provide forecasts of both immediate flood risk in urban areas and long-term flood risk, that could be used for urban planning and so forth. And this again has a need to define and deploy, with any luck. This is still on, I assume. Oh, yes, there we go. It came up, then it went away. All right. They're there. Don't move. Define and deploy these model training and other workflows in our ESnet6 connected infrastructure. A third example, which I don't know why I'm going to hold it like this now. Anyway, put it there. Okay, the third example, we heard it earlier about work on COVID response. So another example, again, using a synchrotron light source from the US Department of Energy, wanting to image COVID proteins at room temperature, which one can do using a new technology called serial synchrotron crystallography. It's a fascinating technology. I won't say more about it, except to say that you end up wanting to do a very large amount of computing to combine data from many measurements of your crystal, many small copies of that crystal, and then combine them in a way that lets you decide whether you've got enough data and can therefore move on to the next crystal, or you need to continue imaging. So we end up with another flow. See, my hands are not anywhere near it there. It was you, I saw you. No. So anyway, so let's move forward. So which is what I wanted to do anyway. So the point I wanted to get, the final point I wanted to make, is that these smart instruments, which have such power by linking with high reliability computing, AI data with sensors, we can express them fairly naturally in terms of these simple flows, but we then need to be able to map them onto the computers and storage systems and other things in our DOE-wide infrastructure. And this, of course, comprises dozens of supercomputers, large data stores, other things, each historically being a little island to itself. So various of us, Ben Brown is going to talk more about this, I think, pushing towards creating an integrated research infrastructure. We've tried this before and called it a grid, and we've tried calling it other things, but we seem to be at the point now with this reliable connectivity where we can actually create it. We've already got some pieces of this in place. A number of us, working with people at the University of Chicago, have deployed data mover services at essentially every national lab, most US research universities, many other institutions that will move data reliably and rapidly from one place to another, ensuring universal connectivity. And further to Vint Cerf's comments, this actually combines cloud for management and locally deployed agents for data movement, it's a hybrid software as a service system. We're starting to see people deploying task orchestration mechanisms so that we can, given one of the flows I've shown you, we can direct computing to the different places where computing has to occur, starting off at perhaps Slack, then moving to Argonne, then to Oak Ridge, perhaps back to put data in yet another location, and we can track activities as they go on. What we end up with it's at least in some facilities, this is the advanced photon source at Argonne, is a system in which essentially every beamline, every storage system is integrated research infrastructure enabled. So these are all little storage agents, all accessible over ESnet6. These are compute agents also accessible over that network. And these can be combined together to run any of these flows shown in the upper right to implement these smart instruments as we want to create them. Maybe I'll skip this slide. So, why I'm excited about ESnet6. Of course, I like to be able to move lots of data, like those climate data sets that were mentioned, and that is in itself transformative. But the fact that we can now reliably start creating these smart instruments is what I find really exciting, because rather than people having to assemble these things within each of, say, 60 beamlines at the advanced photon source, a comparable number of beamlines at many other facilities, they can quickly create and define and deploy these smart instrument flows and have them run reliably using whatever computing is available within the DOE complex, rather than just what they've deployed at their own local computational system. So I think that's going to drive a great deal of discovery and innovation. I would say there's certainly much more to be done. We're still in the early days of building and applying these new instruments. I think scientists have got to get used to how to build them. They need to realize now that they can just take advantage of ESnet6 connectivity. There's a need to reach what I say here, the white space, but I guess on this map, it's more the blue space. Of course, ESnet6 has a remarkable reach. It reaches to, I think we heard, 17 labs, dozens of other research institutions, facilities in Europe. But there are places, say, in the Great Plains where people are measuring collecting environmental data relative to climate change, or people in small universities or colleges in other parts of the US. So we need to find ways to reach them as well. And perhaps we should be looking at high bandwidth Wi-Fi and satellite connectivity and linking that into ESnet6. Perhaps that's what ESnet7 will be. And then I'm also very interested in this notion of how we extend ESnet into the quantum space. So, Vint Cerf talked about linking quantum computers, and maybe that's what we'll end up doing. But quantum sensing is already being showing a great deal of promise. New ways of imaging, new ways of medical imaging based on quantum sensors. And a good quantum sensor will collect entangled data. You need to be able to transfer that perhaps to a quantum computer over a quantum network. So, smart quantum instruments perhaps are also something we should be thinking about. So thanks very much.